In the early 1960s, a strange new little movement of horror was emerging that became known as hagsploitation or grand dame guignol, a kind of weird, grotesque twist on the domestic set women's pictures of the 1940s. Grand dame guignol films focused on mad, murderous or violent older women who were usually played by aging former glamorous film stars. The film, often cited as starting this movement, was Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
I've written a letter to Daddy.
An insane, twisted horror film about an aging former actress played by Bette Davis, torturing and tormenting her wheelchair-bound sister, played by Joan Crawford.
Why, certainly, Miss Hudson. I'm sure we can find something appropriate for you, Miss Hudson.
Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is now generally celebrated as a cult masterpiece, but Grand Dame Guignol movies were dismissed at the time by critics as trashy B-movies, despite their A-list casts. However, a prestigious A-picture made over a decade earlier than Baby Jane actually introduced many of the tropes we'd come to associate with Grand Dame Guignol. Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard focused on an insane, aging actress isolated in an old Gothic mansion.
Haven't they got any eyes? Have they forgotten what a star looks like? I'll show them. I'll be up there again, so help me.
And while it's not considered traditional horror, the Gothic sensibilities and themes of madness, isolation, and murder are all very much front and centre. But unlike the quote-unquote hagsploitation movies of the 60s, Sunset Boulevard was celebrated as a masterpiece. It won multiple Oscars, and over 70 years later is still being named by critics as one of the greatest movies ever made.
You're Norma Desmond. Used to be in silent pictures, used to be big.
I am big. It's the pictures that got small.
Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of home invasion, and we discuss Sunset Boulevard and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
Miss rotten, stinking actress! Press a button, ring a bell, and you think the whole damn world comes running, don't you?
Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Munzer, and as ever, I am your host. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre, one subgenre at a time. We are currently in our 9th season exploring the evolution of home invasion horror, and this is part 7. In this week's episode, as that intro suggested, we're going to be looking at 2 absolute masterpieces, perfect movies about mad, aging women in Gothic Hollywood mansions. This week, we're going to be discussing Sunset Boulevard from 1950 and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane from 1962. Both of these discussions will be spoilerific, and my God, if you haven't seen these 2 films, go and watch them immediately before you listen to our discussion. So, joining me to discuss these 2 Grand Dame Guignol masterpieces, he is an artist, a writer. He's sometimes better known as Portland's premier drag clown, Carla Rossi. He is also the co-host of one of my favourite horror podcasts, The Gaylords of Darkness. Oh, and here he is. He's very excited to be here. All right, I'm just coming. I'm coming. Press a button, ring a bell, and thinks the whole damn world comes running. Anthony Hudson, hello.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. Come in and take a seat. Anthony, you've come all the way from Gaylord's Manor. How is Gaylord's Manor?
You know, it's decrepit as ever, but we're working on a remodel, so we're trying to go a little more open concept, and we're really excited for that. Yeah, we've been picking out swatches, tiles, backsplash materials. It's great. It's great.
Amazing.
Please.
So speaking of, actually, actually. Speaking of, comfy homes, we are talking about horror in the home this series, particularly kind of domestic set horror and the way in which it's going to slowly come to turn into home invasion horror from about the 1970s onwards. There are different facets to this subgenre we're looking at, Anthony, but what do you think of the traditional home invasion? Movies like The Strangers and Funny Games, that kind of thing. Are you a fan of those kind of films?
My thoughts generally range from to, ooh, I'm so mad. I get so mad at home invasion films. I think I have a lot of issues with them. Do I think that? No, I know that. I want to be the type of person that can enjoy them, but I just find them so stressful and enraging because I'm used to / enjoy a little bit more horror movies where there is a comeuppance.
Yes.
Where there is a queen emerging victorious. And in home invasion, I get upset and I have a feeling. But I guess I could say I find that effective, perhaps. But, when it comes to home invasion, the two that I can really watch / that I actually do enjoy, I would say are probably You're Next. I guess I would consider that home invasion. And movie we just did for Gaylord's, Hangman, with Jeremy Sisto, found footage home invasion of sorts.
Yeah, and do you know what? There is a film that I've added into this series because of you guys discussing it, which is John Carpenter's Someone's Watching Me, which I remember you guys discussing and talking about how good it was. I'd never even heard of this John Carpenter movie, and I absolutely loved that movie. It's so good.
Oh, it's just fantastic. And, Adrienne Barbeau, come on.
Oh,
just perfection.
Incredible. Yeah. I know. Yeah, and I think there is that initial reaction to home invasion, like the one you had there, where you get angry, I don't like those films.
Right.
That was the reaction from a lot of listeners when I announced that I was doing home invasion movies. And why do you think that is? What is it about home invasion particularly that almost kind of repels certain horror fans, I think? Right.
Well, I think in horror, one of the initial draws for me as a young person getting into it, not currently, no longer a young person, but one of the draws was the sort of the fantastic quality, being a little weird gay kid obsessed with fairy tales and these morality stories. I think when I would see a slasher film, it immediately kind of feels like I'm getting that little bit of morality play, and I'm getting the girl that once again emerges victorious because she did the right thing. And with home invasion, there's none of that. It's more, there's nothing fantastic. There's not supernatural. There's not witches. There's not ghosts. There's no, even a slasher killer is very different from like a traditional serial killer or some brute that just like storms into your house in the middle of the night and then somehow has the ability to rewind the scene and stop you from getting away.
Yeah, God, yeah.
So like I think it's just the sense of sort of a little bit more reality, more possibility. This is something that can actually happen and can happen. And I think also, our homes are supposed to be our safe spaces.
Right. Yeah.
And now they're no longer safe. Now not even the home is safe.
God. I know. I think that's exactly it, right? And it's that idea that it could happen. Like, I've touched wood. I've been so lucky that I've never... even living in London, like I've never experienced any kind of break-in or anything like that. But have you ever experienced anything close to that yourself, Anthony? Any kind of like home invasion or break-in or anything?
Could you imagine? Oh my God, no. The closest that I've ever come was actually this was like last summer or two years ago. Within the last 2 years, it was quite recent. I was hanging out in my house. And, it was a hot day and we don't have air conditioning. So I've got the doors and the windows open. And I hear this person like screaming out on the street. And they're like yelling about like, I gotta use the bathroom.
Oh, God.
Which is what I announce as I walk down the street every day.
Yeah.
And then I hear, I gotta use the bathroom coming up the steps that lead up to my front door.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, oh, hell no. And so I just run and I immediately shut the door, lock it. Like, I'm the same person that if I hear a doorbell, I will just stand at the other end of the house and like glimpse near the direction of the foyer. And so I shut the door, lock everything. And then what do I hear? I stand, it's like a horror movie. I take like 5 steps back from the door and then I hear my screen door open. And then the person just starts... it's my this is my worst fear, is looking at a doorknob and seeing it begin to jostle from the other side.
Yes.
And they
Yes.
start doing that, and then they start trying. And I was just like, they didn't even knock. They just immediately went for that door. And yes, I mean, they just had to use the bathroom. But
Fuck,
the
that's
terror that
still terrifying, yeah.
And if I had been in a different room, if I had been in the restroom for a second, because typically I'll just leave my front door open, you know, in the summer. But never again. Now it's locked at all times if it's not under supervision.
Right?
Someone could just wandered in.
That is terrifying. Well, I want to ask you a little bit about what kind of existed before the typical home invasion in a way. You know, like I think what's been interesting in this particular season we've been doing so far is we've been looking at almost kind of proto home invasion movies, like movies set in domestic spaces, human horror, nothing supernatural, where something bad happens in the home. And what's been really interesting to look at, especially in sort of relation to what we're going to talk about today, is that a lot of these movies have been very female. You know, they are often women-centric. They were known as women's pictures in the 1940s, right, when they were being made, because obviously domestic set movies were focused predominantly on women in the home. And I think it's really interesting now at the point of the movies we're about to talk about, the way in which that the figure of the woman in the home is being kind of twisted and changed.
It's the terror of the hermit. You know, we're supposed to be social creatures, so we're terrified of anybody that exhibits away from that norm. But also we're terrified of women,
Right.
culturally.
Yeah.
You know, misogyny runs so deep that I mean, I think about growing up in what was that Tim Burton movie with the giant catfish and Ewan McGregor?
Wait, Big Fish, you mean?
Big Fish, yeah. Oh, see, it could have been called Giant Catfish.
Giant
But then
Catfish,
someone said
yeah.
edit, and they cut it down to Big Fish. But with Giant Catfish, the movie, you know, there's that. It was just like, I had a very similar experience growing up where you walk by that house that the old woman lives in, and you're like, you don't want to go in that house. That's where the witch lives. And there's something that culturally we're terrified of hermits. We're terrified of any sort of shut-in, but usually that gets attributed to an old woman. Maybe because women live longer and just are naturally left around in their homes after their husbands have passed, or I mean, assuming they're heterosexual. You know, the grandma trope, but I don't know. I think yeah, hermits, anyone that has removed themselves from society must be feared. I think, you know, this is the reason why we see this in like Hoarders and in reality television, which I think is now the new place we get to experience some of these stories.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And you're right about, like, you know, this idea that, yeah, like, women that have kind of strayed from the cultural norms, i.e. like in the women we're about to talk about in these movies, have successful careers, right? They are rich Hollywood actresses or Hollywood wealthy actresses, but they're not wives and mothers necessarily, and therefore look at how monstrous they become.
Oh, yes.
You know, whatever.
Yes, how dare you? How dare you? You've betrayed your biological imperative. You must be stunted in Arrested Development, and now we must exploit you at a freak show.
Exactly, yes.
To which I say, thank God.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's the thing with these types of movies, right? Like, there's stuff about them that is so dated, but I found it really interesting watching these movies like The Spiral Staircase, or I'm going to be doing with Stacey Lady in a Cage, and Wait Until Dark with Audrey Hepburn. Like, these movies that do have some issues, right? But also they are focused primarily on these amazing women. You know, almost like one-woman shows in these houses or flats, you know?
Yes, they're perfect is also a reality, you know? I mean, this is one of the places where you were able to get these, I mean, maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but you were able to get incredible performances from actresses that otherwise would not be getting work at this phase in their career due to sexism and ageism in Hollywood.
Exactly, which is a perfect segue actually into these two films. But you're right, I think what's really interesting is the way in which these two films we're about to talk about tackle specifically, in quite different ways maybe, the way in which women are portrayed or the way women are thought about once they kind of pass their quote unquote peak in Hollywood, and what happens to them and how they're regarded and how they're dismissed, and then how monstrous they can become and how they can be portrayed,
Yeah, and you're British, so you'll understand Wicca, and there's the
absolutely
it's part of your heritage, right?
Oh yeah.
There's the maiden, the mother, and the crone, as the first episode of Sybil taught us. And in Hollywood, such is also the case. You just have the damsel, you have the mom, who is 30 at best,
right?
And then otherwise, it's just every other role is straight up crone.
Right, exactly. But then actually, which of those types of roles is the most fun to play, I wonder, right?
I mean, when combined, when matched with Hollywood sexism, and the damsel, the maiden, is pretty much just there to be the sparkling ingenue and to get married off to the dude at the end, or some house marm. I mean, who doesn't want to play these roles?
Exactly. So let's get into the first film. We'll go chronologically. So we're going to start with Sunset Boulevard from 1950.
Yes, this is Sunset Boulevard, Los Angeles, California. It's about 5 o'clock in the morning. That's the homicide squad, complete with detectives and newspapermen. A murder has been reported from one of those great big houses in the 10,000 block. You'll read about it in the late editions, I'm sure. You'll get it over your radio and see it on television. Because an old-time star is involved. One of the biggest. But before you hear it all distorted and blown out of proportion, before those Hollywood columnists get their hands on it, maybe you'd like to hear the facts, the whole truth.
Oh my God, this movie. Right. Anthony, just set us up for us. Give us a little brief plot synopsis of Sunset Boulevard.
Sunset Boulevard is perfect. Let's start with that.
It is perfect.
1950, Billy Wilder, my God. I mean, what a legend. And you get the story about Joe Gillis, who is played by Dreamboat William Holden.
Yes.
He is a down-on-his-luck screenwriter. He can't sell a script. The car sharks are after him. They're trying to repossess his car. So you get these goons that are like, "Hey, where's the car?" And they're coming after him. One day he's evading the car sharks, and he ends up crashing into the driveway of esteemed and fallen reclusive former silent film star Norma Desmond, who is gloriously brought to life by Gloria Swanson. My favorite star of Airport 1975, where she plays herself and is credited as famous actress Gloria Swanson and writes all of her own dialogue. Is completely disconnected from the rest of the movie and all of her scenes. So anyway, it's the appropriate sequel to Sunset Boulevard.
Yes, absolutely.
So he falls in with her and basically begins shacking up with her, kind of taking it. She finds out that he's a screenwriter. She is dismayed because she never made a successful transition from silent films into the talkies. And she has this glorious idea for a film of Salome, which it just itself, Salome is such a silent film kind of
Yes.
idea, right? Such a silent film aesthetic. And she has this beautiful vision for it. She begins to work with him on the script. This eventually turns into a sort of sugar mama relationship. After he tries to get away, and he kind of strikes up a relationship with a aspiring young script reader / girl screenwriter to be Betty, who is an absolute queen. They're working together in secret. Norma finds out. She slashes her wrists. He comes back and immediately enters into naturally a sexual relationship with her. She buys him all this stuff. All of this eventually spirals out of control as Norma begins to try to get back into Hollywood, meeting with Cecil B. DeMille. We get to see her famous friends. We get to see Buster Keaton and Hopper. My God, what is happening in this movie?
I know.
And it all spirals out of control as Joe actually tries to leave. Norma comes at him with a gun, shoots him 3 times, and we see him floating in the pool, which, ironically enough, is where the movie began, and he tells us the story of all about how he died. The cops come. Norma descends the staircase. Absolutely. In another world, she has become convinced that she is on the set of Salome, and she's so happy to be in the studio making a picture again. And it ends with that famous line, "I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille."
Oh, God. Do you know what? Watching it again this time, I think I found it sadder than I've ever found it as well. You know, there is something really sad and moving about her whole arc in this movie, I think.
Right.
Isn't it, you know?
I'm not I'm as a feminist, I do perfectly every time, and each time as a viewer on the side of women. But this time I think I really began to zero more into like, hey Joe, what is up with your behavior?
Right.
Is she to blame? Like, I think she is just doing the best she can.
She is, I think, right? I think she is. Tell me, first of all, like, what's your own kind of history with this movie? Obviously, it's one of those movies, right? Like, you hear about, it's always considered one of the greats. It's always in those top of those AFI, BFI type lists, right? But what's your own kind of history and relationship with this movie, Anthony?
You know, I am a noob to this film. I'm going to say that right here, right now. Mm-hmm. I'm a noob. Feel free to pwn the noob. I have never... This has been a film that I have just seen on the AFI list, that I have just heard about in conversation, that I have just read people screaming at each other and making death threats over in Twitter discourse.
Yeah.
It was something that I had never seen until actually the onset of the pandemic. Stacey and I were looking for different films that could kind of echo the sense of entrapment that we were feeling within our own lives.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know why I went that way, like immediately with the pandemic. I just went, straight into like Pulse, Petra von Kant. Like I went straight into all of these domestic, just shut-in films. And then of course they said, you have to see Sunset Boulevard. So I finally sat down and watched it and just said, my God, what have I been missing my entire life?
It's perfect, isn't it? Like you said, it's a perfect movie. I think I came to this relatively late as well. Probably my early 20s when I saw this film for the first time, because it had been talked about on all of those lists and everything else. So I checked it out, and it was even better than I imagined it would be. It blew me away. I do think this is one of the greatest movies ever made. It is such a smart commentary on Hollywood, on women in the industry. It's a kind of noir film. It is obviously a movie about filmmaking, which I love, about the studio system. It's really kind of self-reflexive, and also it's got these elements of gothic horror in it too, right? And all of these elements combined just work as this kind of perfect package. And it's 70 years old, 73 years old. I cannot believe it's that old.
73 years old. At the end of Return of the King, the book, when Saruman just turns to dust, that's me. Just as I begin to think about creeping mortality, which is something I can't stop thinking about as I watch this film, and I say, am I going to turn into Norma Desmond? Thinking 1950, I mean, this movie was as removed from the talkies that Norma Desmond is trying to get back to. They're as removed from that era as we are, essentially, from like the original Scream right now.
Right.
And that's upsetting to me to begin to think about, like, how new that development was, and this transition was like still felt and still rippling in people's lives and in the industry. And that's bonkers.
Yeah, I think that's what's really... Because like, one of my favourite movies that I was more familiar with at the time was Singing in the Rain, right? Which is, 1952? And there must have been there's this weird nostalgia creeping in, clearly, in the 1950s, right, for looking back. I guess it's kind of a generation has passed now, right? And they are looking back at the silent movie era and the heyday and the golden age, and then like sort of that weird transition. And it feels like there's a lot of movies kind of contemplating that at this point in time.
Oh, yeah, especially post-war, post-World War II. I mean, trying to get back to this sense of Americana, of who is this, what is this cultural identity, and how do we not confront the reality of the awful things that we have done as a people?
Right.
Absolutely.
What do you think it is about this movie that you know does mean it's still held in such high esteem? You know, it still is up there on all those lists and everything. I mean, obviously, it's very well made, right? And Billy Wilder clearly is a very respected director. But beyond that, like, do you think there's a reason why this movie has kind of stood the test of time?
I mean, I think it's iconic. It's a noir masterpiece. It's I think what's also interesting about it is it's not like funny that I brought up Scream just randomly, but it's kind of in a way, I would think maybe an early meta film for Hollywood, because it's
Right.
Hollywood making a
Yeah.
film about Hollywood. And you get these legends in the film. You get Norma Desmond coming out doing a Charlie Chaplin routine, which is incredible when that happens.
Yes.
You get Cecil B. DeMille playing himself. You see him on set directing a film and trying to figure out, oh God, how do I navigate Norma Desmond without crushing her soul? It's Hollywood kind of regurgitating itself and having a moment of self-awareness, but also telling like a dark, twisted, funny story, which feels very un-Hollywood, feels very not Hays Code, feels very just removed from the rest of the output that was coming out of the studios, I think.
Yeah, that's so true, because it like, even compared to Singing in the Rain, it doesn't feel as much like Hollywood just patting itself on the back, does it? Like, there is some stuff here where you're like, some of these, the way the directors treat her and just how sort of difficult and cutthroat this industry is, it's Hollywood actually kind of taking quite an interesting look at itself for a film made in 1950. Yeah,
the screenwriter's a little bit of a wormy Weasley rat.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the Norma is sort of, I mean, we could look at her as this horror figure, as this kind of, you know, proto Disney villain, but we could also, she's also a tragic figure when she descends the staircase at the end, and all the cameramen and photographers and press folks are just you know, the air has been replaced with peanut butter, and they're all so ashamed and feel so awkward and sad for her.
Yeah.
There's an element of the tragic there too, and yeah, it's definitely Hollywood laughing at itself but condemning itself at the same time. And when you have, I mean, the name itself, Sunset Boulevard, like, I mean, this is the street that runs directly through the heart of Hollywood.
Right, that's it. Yeah, have you been on this street before, Sunset Boulevard?
You know, who can say?
Yeah.
I've been to LA when I was younger, and then I've been there when I was older, but also drunk and exhausted. So
Sure.
I could have walked by, but I have no recollection of it whatsoever.
I know. It's one of those places, like, it's almost kind of mythic, especially for people, you know, outside of LA or outside of America, you know. But and I think that's the other reason that I know of this film quite well, is that I'm a huge David Lynch fan, and it's one of David Lynch's favorite movies,
Yes.
right? And of course, you can see so clearly in movies like Mulholland Drive, obviously, how in love he is with Sunset Boulevard. I think, you know, it's all kind of there, isn't it?
Oh, I was thinking of Lynch the whole way through, which is hilarious because I did not know that about Lynch. And this feels like chef's kiss, full circle, because looking at this film too, I'm like, my God, like, I love thinking about, you know, how does this echo throughout time? What films have followed in the footsteps of this? What performances have been influenced by like, you know, Norma Desmond, by Gloria Swanson? And as I was watching it, I was like, there is so much what would become Lynch DNA in this.
Yes.
There's so much of, like, I'm thinking of Diane Ladd's work with David Lynch, or Grace Zabriskie.
Yes.
I was just, the other day, you know, last week, I was like getting over food poisoning, which I often find myself with. And that's my home invasion. And I sat down and I was like, God, I feel awful, but the only thing that could cheer me up right now is Inland Empire. And when you get that opening sequence of Grace Zabriskie coming into Laura Dern's house and just screaming like, brutal fucking murder!
Fucking murder. Yeah, so
God,
good.
so good! And,
I mean,
like,
that film
was,
peaks with that scene, doesn't it? That's the
it
thing.
Absolutely. Like 12 minutes in, the movie is done. Enjoy the continuing the 4 hours that remain. Rabbits, Laura Dern just screaming. I mean, I'm in heaven.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's all in Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, and this kind of like the Hollywood lie, the Hollywood nightmare, you know, the facade versus the reality and all that kind of thing. And like, it doesn't do it as overtly as Lynch does, but it kind of feels like it's all in here in a kind of really subtle, interesting way, I think, you know? So good.
Yep. Absolutely.
So we got to talk about Gloria Swanson's performance. You know, obviously Gloria Swanson, who herself, and there's so much of this, like you've already said, it's really meta, this film, because obviously she was actually this silent movie star, you know, and now appearing as this kind of, you know, fictional version of herself as Norma Desmond, right? What do you think of her in this and her performance?
I mean, is this one of the greatest performances of all time? Absolutely. Like, she is incredible. And what's hilarious is I don't know. I want to believe, I'm Mulder and Scully. I want to believe that this is entirely Gloria Swanson just going deep into some character work and really, you know, bringing out just sheer magic for us. And yet I wonder how much of this is just her.
Right.
I think she's fully, I'm not trying to shit on her. I think she is fully, incredibly, successfully embodying this role in just a remarkable way. But I'm so curious how much of her was already Norma Desmond.
Yeah.
The way, those, like, I mean, but it's also built into the role, but like, and obviously so much of it too is Wilder's direction, because there's just these sequences like, Norma Desmond is on another meta level. I mean, the way the movie is filmed itself, Norma Desmond is acting for the camera that is currently filming her for the film that we are watching.
Yes.
So we're watching her vamp and do these giant expressions. She's all about faces. She had a face. and she's doing these incredible expressions just like right in front of the camera, for the camera, but while she's having a scene with Joe, and Joe isn't aware of the camera, she seems to be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just brilliant. It's such a brilliant way of fusing silent film acting with what people are doing now contemporarily in the talkies. And it's just it's actually quite astounding of a balancing act in terms of how she's playing this both visually and with a film vocabulary, but as in the act of bringing a role to life too.
And actually, I was trying to read up a little bit about her, you know, and I think that there are parallels, obviously, to her career, but I think actually she did have a more successful career in the talkies than her character Norma Desmond does, actually, you know, because clearly she is such a brilliant actress. You know, you can see it from this film even, but I think a lot of her contemporaries did go that way that, you know, Norma Desmond did. So I think she's drawing on some of her contemporaries, but she did all kinds of stuff through the 1940s. Like she went into sculpting and painting and all of this other stuff as well and became really successful in that. Like she sounds like an incredible person, actually, like the amount of stuff that she did, you know, after that kind of boom of her career in the 1920s. She kind of kept herself working in various different ways, you know, but I think she did get to do a few talkies, and then obviously this movie kind of completely kind of gave her this sort of renaissance in her career, I guess. I thank God for that. We need more Gloria Swanson, and I mean, could you imagine not having this performance, and then even worse, not having her performance in Airport 1975? Like, oh, now I've not seen Airport 1975, but just you telling me that she's in this as herself, I think I'm going to have to watch this immediately.
Mike, okay, this is also, I mean, this is partially why I ask how much of Norma Desmond is Gloria Swanson, because when you watch Airport 75, I mean, you get Karen Black, you know, now back alive President Pilot Karen Black, as we call her in Gaylord's Darkness. You get her not only, like, I mean, it's the original Airplane. Karen Black is the Julie Haggerty flight attendant that ends up flying the plane.
Oh my God, amazing.
But it's an ensemble film. So you have Helen Reddy as this nun that's, singing to Linda Blair and in her little hospital bed on the plane. And then you have Gloria Swanson, who is literally detached from the rest of the movie. She wanted to write all of her own dialogue. So they will be trying to, Karen Black is flying the plane. They don't know if they're going to live or die. And then they cut to Gloria Swanson and she's like, that's why I always take 3 sugars with my tea every day. It's so weird.
Oh my God.
And she's working on her memoirs. So we just get her reciting stories about her life. And it is, I love that she worked her way into a big disaster film, like in the twilight years of her career, but also said, I want to write all my own dialogue and I'm doing it my way. And what feels more Norma Desmond than that? She directed herself in a movie that she has nothing to do with. It's amazing.
This is incredible. I mean, this is the thing. This whole movie is brilliant, but I do find that when we leave the house and we go elsewhere, like when he escapes and goes to his New Year's party, that stuff's great. But I miss it. I miss being back in that gothic house with Norma Desmond, like it's so good every time she's on screen,
Well, and I think when you talk about how earlier you mentioned horror and that this isn't horror, but also there's these strong gothic elements. And I mean, when you're in Norma Desmond's house, it's the Addams Family, right? And she even she has excuse my language, she has the Munster Mobile that she drives around in. It's like this gothic atrocity, this giant shark of a car, upholstered in leopard with a gold-plated car phone. I've never understood how car phones work, and even especially back then, I'm like, you have car phones?
What the hell?
How does that work? How
the fuck does that work?
That's witchcraft. So
that really is. Yeah.
But I mean, the rest of the time when you're in the house, it is straight up like thinking about it. I'm like, this actually, like, I mean, this is film noir, right? This movie, but
yeah.
But what I think is so different is there is such a camp aesthetic. There is such, because, Wilder also is a master of comedy. And so there's this black comedy sort of camp, grotesque absurdity underneath the film. Like when Joe first shows up and she's in the midst of her chimpanzee wake and then he witnesses a chimpanzee funeral, and she's just only filmed in candlelight and she has those sunglasses on, like she looks like Catherine Deneuve in the opening of The Hunger. It is fully I think the combination of noir and this like absurd gothicism kind of made it a horror film. And the way the house is shot, the castle, I mean it feels like Dracula's castle. It feels like that's what makes, when I watch it and I say, is this even noir? Is this feels more so like a Universal Studios horror film.
There's even that moment, right, when Max is like playing the organ and it's like that kind of classic kind of gothic horror kind of music that he's playing on an organ.
Yeah.
Hey, you! Max, whatever your name is, what are my things doing here? I'm talking to you. My clothes and things are up in the room.
It's so interesting. Like I was thinking about this with regard to Psycho, because I remember talking to a film critic, Kim Newman, on this podcast about Psycho, and they made the point that when we're outside of the Bates house, we're in this kind of almost like melodrama, about Janet Leigh kind of escaping with this money, and then when we arrive at the Bates house, it's like suddenly then we're in a gothic horror movie, and that's kind of how this movie plays out. Like it feels like we're in a noir when we're out and about on the streets with William Holden being followed by these sharks or whatever. Yeah. When we arrive and we're inside that house, we're in like classic gothic horror, aren't we? Basically, when we're in that house.
Yeah. Absolutely, and also very similar to Psycho. I mean, he's driving around looking nervously. Yeah. All around him, just like Janet Leigh, just trying to get away, and then he ends up at the Bates Motel where he eventually will die.
Yes, that's so true. Yeah, and it reminds me of the first film that we covered in this series is The Old Dark House, and essentially there is that there's that James Whale film, there's that level of kind of camp absurdity, like you said, to what's going on in this house and these kind of larger than life characters.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, the person in distress arriving at the house, old dark house, all the way to Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Right.
I mean, this is formative horror material and DNA. And I think it's absolutely intentionally in Sunset Boulevard. And then when you look at the ripple effects, I love looking at the ripple effects. I mean, we see this aesthetic come through. I'm a champion of this film. I mean, a lot of people are, but I'm a champion of this film in particular, thinking about it as a queer horror film. But Death Becomes Her is another example of... Death Becomes Her is fully in conversation with Sunset Boulevard, where those you see, Isabella Rossellini's house or Meryl Streep's mansion, these interiors are filmed in the exact same way as they are in Sunset Boulevard. And in Death Becomes Her, you even get those aspects of like what we're seeing the beginning of in Sunset Boulevard, where you get the beauty treatments, you get her having like the paste put on her, and she's wearing Gloria Swanson is wearing those weird gloves, and it's just such a funny sequence. All of that comes through later in Death Becomes Her, and I'm like, so this creates a pipeline, the universal horror Dracula to beautiful aging damsel women in Hollywood crones pipeline right there.
It's so interesting, and you're so right, and there are these connections to all of these movies that are nowhere near as kind of critically acclaimed as Sunset Boulevard, right? It's really interesting. It's like Sunset Boulevard is kind of almost hiding that within its more prestige elements or something, isn't it? It's so interesting.
Yeah. I mean, well, and it has all of these trappings of these stars. It was funny as I was watching this, I was kind of thinking like, is this sort of, I mean, as a sort of meta Hollywood film, is this Norma Desmond's New Nightmare?
Yeah.
Like it's very...
It is.
I mean, when you even look at her relationship with, I think the relationship with Max, with her butler, is so crucial to this film and crucial to that critique of Hollywood. And it's particularly the revelation that he is her ex-husband and that he was a silent film director.
Right.
And now he's working, and it's played by Eric von Stroheim, who did exactly that.
Yeah.
Was a silent film director. But these two together, you know, these people that couldn't make this successful transition into the talkies, that they, in the process, they kind of, well, this comes up in the next film and another ripple effect here. They Grey Gardens themselves.
Yes.
And watching these two, I was like, are they the original Mickey and Valerie Cherish from The Comeback? Like Max and Norma? I can't believe it. So it feels very Hollywood New Nightmare by way of The Comeback.
That is exactly what it is. It's that level of meta, like New Nightmare. Because you're right. Because Max, played by Eric von Stroheim, who was a director and also had directed Gloria Swanson in Silent Pictures. So they had worked together in the way that these characters had worked together. It's mad, isn't it? Like the amount of parallels going on to real life in this film. It must have been really strange for them, you know?
Oh yeah, strange for them, and I'm sure part of it's what gave it its power and its long lasting appeal. You know, is that it was probably strange for the audience as well. Yeah. This is one of the first times we're seeing this much behind the curtain, even though it's fiction.
And do you think, you talked about this in relation to kind of queer horror and that kind of thing, do you see this as a kind of camp or queer horror in the way that I'm sure we'll talk about Baby Jane as being, right? And, Norma Desmond in the way that she looks, in the way that she performs and all of that?
100%. This woman is a Disney villain. She's a drag queen. Disney villains and drag queens are exactly the same, you know. She is everything. She is heightened femininity. She is a ghoul. she is us. 100%.
So good, isn't it? And that's it. It's just that that slightly larger than life, and it's not as big as, when we talk about Bette Davis, a lot of people use the words kind of grotesque, right, when they talk about the performances in Baby Jane. It's not quite that, is it? But it is like you can see the through line almost.
Absolutely. I mean, Baby Jane, as a sparkling example of Grand Dame Guignol,
right.
I mean, it is always credited, as sort of the ground zero, the patient zero for that genre, that subgenre. But I mean, really, it's Sunset Boulevard.
There just aren't any faces like that anymore. Maybe one, Garbo. Those idiot producers. Those imbeciles. Haven't they got any eyes? Have they forgotten what a star looks like? I'll show them. I'll be up there again, so help me.
But also, is it Sunset Boulevard, or is it like, Great Expectations? Is it Miss Havisham? Like, where does she come from?
Yeah, absolutely. That feels like the origin for this whole archetype, doesn't it? Miss Havisham, and they even mention Miss Havisham, I think, in this movie, don't they? And I think it is like, she's not just your straight up kind of weird, monstrous villain in this movie. Like, I think that's the thing about it. Like, if anything, this movie is like an indictment of the way women are treated in Hollywood, right? And even through William Holden's narration and just the way the way he talks about her and describes her and what he thinks of her and how little he thinks of her, basically, or like kind of what a joke he thinks she is throughout, is... Like, I think I realized it watching it more, second, third time round, that really we're seeing this woman through his eyes, more than anything, aren't we? Through his narration.
Yes.
And he sees her as this kind of mad, monstrous, eccentric, right? Maybe more than actually she's just this unhappy woman, like struggling in this industry, I think.
After that, an army of beauty experts invaded her house on Sunset Boulevard. She went through a merciless series of treatments. Like an athlete training for the Olympic Games, she counted every calorie, went to bed every night at 9. She was absolutely determined to be ready. Ready for those cameras that would never turn.
I mean, well, and that's fully what I was thinking as I was watching this, watching his treatment of her, watching his understanding of her, his lack of understanding of her. Where we see he leaves, he comes back home, he finds out she has slashed her wrists, feeling rejected, and he immediately enters into a sexual relationship with her. Like, we see him go to kiss her, and then we see them embrace, and the camera fades out, and we all know what happened. From that point on, she is bestowing him with gifts, and he is a kept man.
Yes.
But it's like, she told him to leave when she was on that bed with the slashed wrist. She's like, get out of here, leave, don't see me like this, and he stays with her and then takes it to the next level. Like, he is leading her on throughout this film, and lying to her, lying about the script, lying about it's the fact that he has this idea that she can't take it because he's worried that, she'll kill herself and he'll be responsible. But it's like, Norma tried that and she still survived, and she still told you to leave. Like, she, as this movie has demonstrated, she will be the end of you. You're not going to affect her in any way. So, like, there's some blame. I find some blame with him. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's true. And then even, that scene with Cecil B. DeMille is really interesting. And, he's only in it it's almost like a cameo. Apparently I read that his fee was $10,000 for one day of shooting to be on this film, which apparently was more than Gloria Swanson's entire fee, which goes to show everything, right? But even that scene is really interesting because it doesn't show him in a particularly great light, right? He's not showing himself they're all sort of like, oh yeah, Norma, great to see you, and then they're all just sort of like, yeah, no, that's never going to happen, we're never going to work with her again, kind of thing. And it's all there, like the kind of the snidiness, the lies, the backstabbing, it's all there in that one scene with Cecil B. DeMille as well, which is, again, like kind of bold for its time.
Absolutely. It's such a brutal scene. It is so awkward. It is so awkward. And once again, I immediately rippled forward thinking about the comeback and thinking about every time Lisa Kudrow walks into a room and the executives, like, their blood just goes cold. God, this movie is so influential and in places that I would not have even expected it.
Doesn't Norma Desmond even say, she says, "Come back, I hate that word," like that's even mentioned in the script.
Yeah, absolutely.
So good. So good. And like we've sort of mentioned this already, but what do you think of Wilder's direction of this film? Just like stylistically and visually.
Oh, I mean, just masterful. Obviously, incredible. It's stunning. It's tonally a magic trick. It's a balancing act. I don't know how he did this, where it's a thriller, it's a comedy, it's a horror film, it's a romance, it's a tragedy.
Yeah.
And it works on all of those levels, all at the same time.
It really does.
But how do you do that? How do you do that unless you're like an evil gay genius? Billy Wilder, were you secretly a gay genius? Like, what's happening here?
Well, and sadly, I've read and heard that he wasn't the nicest man to work with at times. He's just one of those classic directors from that era, quite demanding, quite controlling, could be particularly mean towards his actresses, apparently. And that is just something that we get weirdly, don't we, with a lot of these kind of filmmakers who weirdly also are really good at telling these very sort of female stories.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, look at Vertigo. It's like, I actually don't even know how to read that film.
I know.
I can recognize that it's, to some extent, in technical aspects, a masterpiece. It's not my favorite Hitchcock film, but I can recognize that it is so profoundly well made and it has incredible performances and the story is compelling. But what is functioning in this film? What is Hitchcock doing by critiquing himself and his treatment of women and the Hitchcockian blonde, Kim Novak sort of muse ideal that he has, but he's also still kills the woman. Then essentially learns nothing, but is implicating himself. It's so strange. It's so strange. But yeah. That's such an interesting trope of these directors, these men. That completely abuse or mistreat or fail to live up to the women who they are entirely dependent on to tell their stories.
Right.
And who absolutely bring... I mean, we've seen this happen with Shelley Duvall. We've seen this happen with Gloria Swanson. We've seen this happen with any woman worth her salt who is working hard to make a movie legendary. So you have to wonder, like, what did they... Were they aware that these women are working,
right?
And giving them, the thing that they get to hold as their product?
Yeah, like the reason that this film is as iconic as it is, it's not William Holden's movie, it's Gloria Swanson's movie, right? This is the thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and finally, I guess I just want to ask you about this film's legacy, and you've already talked a little bit about that, about, the amount of movies, right, that I think, especially coming to this late like we did, you see, right, its influence in hundreds of movies that have come since, particularly movies about Hollywood, I suppose.
Oh yeah. I mean, it comes through in just even our understanding of what happens to actresses. I mean, this shows up in how we depict. I mean, this is why we see this in The Comeback. This is why we see this in any sort of parody of. I feel like there's elements of Norma Desmond that even come through in, like, Absolutely Fabulous in Patsy.
Yes. Yes.
It's kind of bonkers how much this affected, or that sort of Miss Havisham ideal affected these women. Now thinking about it, I was like, thinking about this, watching Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, thinking about Grande Dame Guignol, I begin to think, like, another, overlap with Gaylords of Darkness, and something that we also often talk about on there, and that Stacey and I just love in our off-air lives too, outside of the manor, is I'm thinking, is Real Housewives like the contemporary final result of Sunset Boulevard? Because honestly, I mean, you get some of the Ramona Singer or to some extent Lisa Vanderpump, or some of these women that are just a little past it and not fully with it. Yeah. Maybe that's more so Ramona Singer, definitely, than Lisa Vanderpump. But I'm like, the voyeuristic eyes on that, and the entertainment and repulsion of the viewer. I feel like Real Housewives is now satisfying this sort of thirst that Sunset Boulevard initially put on us.
Yeah, that's so true. Probably more so than movies that have more of a direct link to it as well. Like, have you seen the Damien Chazelle film Babylon? Have you checked that out?
No, I still have not gotten to see that.
I mean, it's not. It's kind of it's doing the same thing that Sunset Boulevard Boulevard and Singing in the Rain did, this movie about, transitioning to talkies. But also it's like 3.5 hours long and it's not...
That's why I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to make... A movie is not a movie unless it's like 3 hours and 15 minutes these days. And I'm like, give me 6 minutes tops.
Yeah.
That's what I'm in for.
Yeah. And actually, we should just mention before we wrap up as well. I mean, like, Buster Keaton in this movie as well, right? Those little cameos where you suddenly get all of these silent movie stars playing themselves popping up on screen, barely doing anything as well, right? But how cool is that? I just love that. Yeah.
That's a drive-by Keaton. It's like, wait, what? Buster Keaton is just there playing cards, just sitting in her house. It's incredible. I can't imagine the viewer back then, because at this point, they're only 50 years removed from people seeing a train come at the camera and panicking.
Yeah.
So imagine just like a random cut to with Buster Keaton just hanging out in this film about Hollywood. It's just wild.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Unbelievable. What a movie. So good.
So good.
It got all the awards, didn't it? It won Oscars. I think she didn't win, though, sadly. Gloria Swanson was nominated and didn't win.
Ridiculous.
Which is a connection with Bette Davis as well, right? In the next one we're about to talk about.
Absolutely.
But it got lots of technical awards, and it's always considered like one of the all-time greats, isn't it? Do you think it holds up? Like we've said, it's 73 years old, but do you think it holds up well?
I think it could be better. Absolutely, it's perfect. I will say it got those accolades, Mike, but it also got its own Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. Which
I did not know this.
Oh, Sunset Boulevard is also a musical by Andrew Lloyd Webber. I loathe Andrew Lloyd Webber. But I love Phantom because it's just so ridiculous. I do not know the music for Sunset Boulevard. I haven't heard it. But it seems actually like it might be quite good. And Glenn Close portrayed Norma Desmond famously in a production of it. And allegedly, a film is in the works. And I want nothing more.
Yeah, I could see that with Glenn Close. There's another kind of interesting through line, because another thing we're going to be talking about on this series is that wave of movies about women coming to kind of ruin the home, like Fatal Attraction, The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Single White Female, like that incredible little era of horror movies as well, and in some ways, again, maybe even more so Baby Jane, but you can see the through line there, I think.
Oh,
as well,
absolutely. Absolutely. And this time Glenn Close will be boiling the rabbit in her own house and singing about it. But I'm like, God, make that movie happen, because I need to see her on film as Norma Desmond and singing. And if anything, that could be, the Oscars mean nothing these days, but that could be a good reason to finally give Glenn Close an Oscar.
Oh my God. But you will have to listen to the Andrew Lloyd Webber music though, Anthony. That's the price.
That's the pound of flesh that
exactly
must be exchanged.
Hello, everybody. Before we move into the second half of this week's episode, I'm just going to take a moment to thank this week's sponsor. That's $20 Patreon subscriber, Damon Young. A big thank you to Damon for your kindness and generosity. Damon dropped me a little message, which I'm going to read out now. Damon says, "Hi, Mike. First of all, thank you so much for being the superfan we all needed to pull this particular horror community together. I discovered the evolution of horror on my commute into the city back when I was still commuting, thank you COVID, but your podcasts and Patreon content have really been the extra icing on the horror cake ever since. As a child of the 80s, I really came into my own in horror through anthology series, Twilight Zone, Dark Room, Tales from the Dark Side, etc. And I love that format of short, digestible horror. So, even though I'm technically a screenwriter, my heart is in my horror short ebooks on Amazon Kindle. You can find me at amazon.com/author/day4night, or just search for my most popular short, the very home invasion friendly 33 Ways to Kill My Husband. After a long break, I've just published my latest called The Takers, which will be ready for pre-order on June 1st. 1st. So I would love to have my EvoPod fam check that out along with the rest of my catalogue. Thanks again, and hope to catch up with you all in Fright Fest one of these days when I make it across the pond. All the best, Damon. Damon, thank you so much for that lovely message, and thank you for being a $20 sponsor. I am excited to check out some of your horror short stories, and just a reminder to everyone there, you can either search for his most popular short, 33 Ways to Kill My Husband, which sounds excellent, or you can find his page on amazon.com/author/day-for-night. One more time, a huge thank you to this week's sponsor, $20 Patreon subscriber, Damon Young. And if you want to become a sponsor just like Damon, get your own little dedicated segment in the middle of an episode where you can plug your own work, your writing, your blog, your artwork, your podcast, your whatever, then just sign up to our Patreon. Signing up at the top level of $20 per month will get you access to all of the bonus content and make you an official sponsor. Patreon.com/evolution of horror.
All right, you fools. You've brought it on yourselves. Everything would have come right if you'd only left me alone. You've driven me near madness with your peering through the keyholes and gaping through the curtains. And now you'll suffer for it. You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you.
I'll show you. Those were the sinister tones you just heard there of Claude Rains in the classic Universal Monsters movie, The Invisible Man from 1933, turning 90 years old this year. Can you believe it? And very excitingly, if you are in or within reach of London, you can come along to a very special Evolution of Horror screening of The Invisible Man happening on the 17th of May. On the evening of the 17th, we're going to be at the Regent Street Cinema. That is one of the oldest and most beautiful cinemas in London, screening The Invisible Man on the big screen in front of a live audience. And then afterwards, we're going to be hosting a special live panel. I'm going to be joined on stage by Becky Dark, Kim Newman, and Kevin Lyons. It's going to be the first time Kevin Lyons is joining me for a live podcast discussion. So it's going to be so much fun to have those three with me on stage to discuss this brilliant movie. And then you can hang out with us all, chat to us about the movie in the bar afterwards. So I'd love to see some of you guys come along. Please do come see this brilliant film with us on the big screen and hang out with us. It's going to be a lot of fun. Head on over to evolutionofhorror.com/events. On that page, you will see details of every screening we've got coming up over the next few weeks, including events happening in Reading and Birmingham and other places as well. So do keep an eye on that page. But that one will take you directly to the Regent Street Cinemas website where you can pick up your tickets for The Invisible Man. I really cannot wait for this. I think it's going to be a really, really special evening. So grab a ticket while you can. That's evolutionofhorror.com/events. Okay, let's move into the second half of this week's episode as Anthony Hudson and I discuss the Grand Dame Guignol classic, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
Press a button, ring a bell, and you think the whole damn world comes running, don't you? Lunch, Miss Hudson. Why, certainly, Miss Hudson. I'm sure we can find something appropriate for you, Miss Hudson.
Oh my God.
Tell us, Anthony, what's this movie all about?
Oh, what isn't this movie about? This movie is about life, the universe, and everything. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane opens in 1917, and we see little Baby Jane Hudson doing a show. She is a Shirley Temple-esque legend child star. She is famous for her song I've written a letter to Daddy that she sings with her. Is that her father?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah,
It's back when Daddy was still alive, and so she regales the people. The people love her. They sell oversized replica Baby Jane dolls, Baby Jane Hudson dolls that are terrifying. They're $3.25 in the lobby after the show. But it turns out Baby Jane has a bad streak. Everyone goes to the stage door to meet Baby Jane after the show, and she's having a meltdown, and she wants ice cream. And her sister Blanche looks on from the darkness with her braids as the sullen child who is not in the spotlight. And her mom tells her, "One day you'll be special, Blanche, and please take care of Baby Jane." Cut to 1935. Baby Jane sucks. She's making terrible movies. Which is hilarious because we see a studio executive watching one of Baby Jane's films, and it's an actual Bette Davis picture from back in the day.
Yes,
and they are talking mad shit. They're like, "This accent is crap. This movie is bad. She sucks." And we're watching an actual Bette Davis performance from earlier in her career, and it is wild. Yeah. So Baby Jane sucks. Everyone hates her and is turned on her. But she is getting these roles because Blanche is now a star. Blanche is making the picture. She is Hollywood's it girl. And she has it in her contract that for every picture that she films, the studio also has to make a picture with Baby Jane. This is all unbeknownst to Baby Jane Hudson. At some point, something happens one night. There is a wild party moment. Something happens. They are coming home. It is believed that Blanche is at the gate when the car comes home, rolls into Blanche, breaks her back, and she is left in a wheelchair from that point on. Now we flash to 1962, modern day. Well, actually, it was yesterday is when it was said. The title card says yesterday, which I love. It's incredible. So this is a period piece.
Yeah.
The neighbors are wondering what's up with the Hudson sisters next door. And it is full Grey Gardens. They live, which is hilarious because Grey Gardens would show up, 12, 13 years later.
Yeah.
Baby Jane Hudson basically runs the house along with housekeeper Elvira. Blanche is just in her wheelchair, trapped in her bedroom, being taken care of by her sister and by Elvira. Blanche just walks around the house and is like, yeah. And she's dabbling with alcohol, and Blanche has to keep the alcohol away from Baby Jane. But Blanche is able to find the stuff. And ultimately, Elvira goes home one day and Blanche just kind of goes on a bender and starts treating her sister however she wants. Things spiral out of control. Elvira gets fired by Blanche. Blanche ends up killing her. She brings on a pianist. She hires an accompanist who she's working on her big comeback with. And he's like some branch of American Cockney that I've never seen before.
Yeah, what is going on with this accent? Yeah, anyway.
he and his mother, these two American Cockneys just hanging out in Hollywood. Blanche has had to tell Baby Jane that they are going to lose the house. And the natural fallout of that is that Baby Jane is going to have to go live somewhere else. She's going to have to be taken care of. She's going to have to get special care because they just don't have the money anymore. So Blanche kills Elvira. She sets up this whole scenario where she's going to produce her dream comeback. She's writing her letters to Daddy. She's pounding on the cake makeup and the little Shirley Temple ringlet hair and subjecting the viewer to atrocities. And it's wonderful. Yes. And meanwhile, Blanche is fully 9 to 5'd. Like, she has 9 to 5'd her and is keeping her hung up on the garage door opener in the bedroom. Starving her. We watch poor Joan Crawford, like, it turns into a mummy over the course of the film.
Oh my God, yeah.
And they just keep adding more eyeshadow and age lines to her face as the film goes on.
Yeah.
Ultimately, everything gets found out. The Cockney pianist mother reveals that, you know, there's sort of a streetcar named Desire. There's streetcar named Desire DNA in this as well.
Yeah,
some Blanche Dubois in here, you know, some Tennessee Williams. But there's sort of a Blanche Mitch romance that's burgeoning between Baby Jane and Edwin, the pianist. And the mother ends up revealing that, you know, it was rumored that, and the studios covered it up, that Baby Jane paralyzed her sister. So he goes back and everything is brought to a light. The killing of Elvira is uncovered. Baby Jane takes off before anyone can find her, and she drags Blanche along with her, and she has just fully had a psychotic break at this point and is living back in the past, is acting like the little girl, is talking in that high voice, and then she just takes Blanche to the beach, and in what is the most spectacular visual of all time, you get poor mummified Joan Crawford just laying on the beach, just like drying up and dehydrating in the sun.
Yeah.
Just laying in the sand, paralyzed, while Baby Jane just sits there and like builds a sandcastle.
Yeah.
She gets some ice cream, and then we get the ending of Sunset Boulevard all over again, where the police come to find to find Baby Jane. The all the people in the beach circle around her. They're like, "What's up with this crazy woman?" But Baby Jane thinks that she is acting for her audience once again, and it's Baby Jane's beach blanket bingo in that moment with all these bikinied and, you know, bathers hanging out watching her, and meanwhile Joan Crawford just rots in the sand.
Yes.
and then it ends. Did Joan Crawford live? Nobody knows. I'm guessing she probably didn't, but it just ends with that, the dancing and the mummified sister in the sand. It's incredible.
What a deranged movie this is, right? I love it so much. Anthony, tell me, what are your thoughts on this movie? When did you first discover Baby Jane?
I will also say this movie is perfect. If I had any critique, I mean, this something that I love about older movies is I can often trust that they will be slightly shorter than new American releases.
Yes.
And I did forget that this movie is like 100 hours long.
Right. It doesn't need to be as long as it is, I think.
It really doesn't. But I mean, you get so much of that, like this era and this era of this you know, this burgeoning Grand Dame Guignol, you get so much melodrama, and you have to sop all of it up, you know, like an egg with some bread. You just have to sop up all of it. And so it's 100 hours long, but you get 100 hours of these two women, of Joan Crawford and Bette Davis. I mean, it's a classic. It's incredible. It's formative visually and in terms of the iconography. I mean, this is so formative for me personally as a drag performer. Baby Jane Hudson. I mean, we share a name. Come on.
Yes.
Baby Jane Hudson is so key to Carla's DNA and my performances as Carla Rossi. And I mean, I've written the letter to Daddy like multiple times. I have, because I saw this movie, you know, years and years and years ago when I first moved to Portland. I thought I have to educate myself. So that's when I sought out all the movies that I couldn't find in my little small town where I grew up and that weren't available at the Blockbuster or the Hollywood Video. So I went to Movie Madness, our local video store, and I rented all the John Waters films I could find. I rented Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And from that point on, it was ingrained in my blood, just like that cake makeup that's pounded into her pores.
Oh, it's so
remarkable.
Good, isn't it? And we've talked before together about Pink Flamingos. The last time you were on the podcast, we talked about Pink Flamingos and how important, obviously, Divine was to the history of drag, right? In that you basically said she was drag, right?
Yeah.
But what about Baby Jane? I mean, it feels like, how important is Baby Jane to the history and the evolution of queer culture and drag specifically?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if if you look at performers contemporary performers today, like across the pond, as it were.
Yeah.
I love embarrassing myself in front of you. If you look at Divine David, one of my absolute all-time favorite performers, Divine David is fully serving Baby Jane. Here in America, I mean, Christine, the incredible performance artist drag terrorist, Christine with 2 E's, she's covered in bruise makeup. She's vile, but she does the most arresting, disconcerting, cognitive dissonance-inducing Martha Graham-esque choreography while she is dancing in front of a pillowcase or a bed sheet on stage that says her name written in like what looks like shit.
Wow. Oh my God, I've just Google imaged her. This looks amazing and terrifying.
Terrifying. Absolutely. Like, she wears bright, glowing blue contacts. She's covered in bruise makeup.
Yeah.
She pretty much just wears a jockstrap. But what she's performing is so cute and so well done that it is disarming you visually. I mean, this is Baby Jane. I think any queer person who is at all intrigued by or has ever felt this projection on them of the combination of both glamour and its decay, of the grotesque, you cannot help but be inspired by Baby Jane Hudson. Because it's also Baby Jane, I think, as a performer, Baby Jane is also very reflective of all of our dark sides. Like, this is what's going to happen to all of us. Like, there's Norma Desmond, but Norma Desmond was also an incredible star. Baby Jane never reached that level.
Right.
Except, at the very beginning when she was a child. She never came back from that. And I think for many of us, we're operating from a similar place where we dream of being the greats, but are we really, and will we all just actually end up like Baby Jane? Like, there's something actually kind of human about her underneath all the horror and all the cake makeup.
Yeah, no, for sure. And actually, yeah, you're so right about that, about how it brings to mind that idea that people talk about, which is that kind of the curse of the child stars, right? There was so much of that through the 70s and 80s particularly, wasn't there? Like these huge stars that, made it big when they were little kids, and then had like all kinds of problems and, not just in their career, but mentally and emotionally because of how they were treated as children and how they were exploited, and that's all there in this movie too.
And I mean, look at how opportunities change. You could be child star Shirley Temple, but like the opportunities aren't going to be there for you when you grow up. But I mean, how they've perhaps shifted today due to, making some attempts to give women things to do later in life, or even a quarter of the way through life. I mean, we've saw this child star meltdown happen with Drew Barrymore, who is so highly regarded and who I love so much. But we saw that, who also went on to play Little Edie. But we see this happen with Drew Barrymore, but then things were able to change. Drew Barrymore was able to make it as a producer and able to make it now. And now she's a daytime talk show host, and she also got to play Little Edie, and she's still acting, and but back in the day, this is not the case. And what's interesting too about watching both of these films, and I think thinking about Baby Jane a little bit later in 1962, you kind of get that moment between the neighbors, the mom and the daughter. And the daughter's like, oh, isn't she 150 years old by now? And the mom's like, actually, she's not much older than me. And thinking about that, also, I can't help but think about how in the 50s and the 60s with Sunset Boulevard and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, there's also a meta level to this of talking about where we are in the industry and talking about what happened to these legends and what's happening to these actors at these shifting points in their lives and culturally the shifts that are happening. This is the first full generation, the first full lifespan of people that have seen themselves on camera. So this is the first time that you have had to live against an image that is forever captured in time. That never had existed ever in humanity at that point. Like, stars could be stars, and we would never have an image to go back to that's a living record of them. Like, Sarah Bernhardt only lives on in terms of the photos that we have and stories about her. But
oh my God, yeah. Yeah.
we never got to see what happened. You know, we never got to see the Norma Desmonding of Sarah Bernhardt if there was one. So what's so fascinating about Baby Jane is that, yeah, you get an entire lifespan of this is the first time that this has ever happened. And now we're seeing the result of that. To some extent.
God, yeah, that's so true. And actually, what's changed in that 10 years since Sunset Boulevard is, of course, that television has become a thing. And there's a mention of that at the beginning that now, you know, Jane Hudson's or Blanche's old movies are just played on a Sunday afternoon on television that people can watch, right? And now they have commercials in the middle of them. But like, it's there is that feeling of, oh, now they just switch on their television in their home and they see themselves younger. And you're right, you know, this is the first time ever that was able to happen for a generation of people, which is insane.
Yeah, it's so nuts. And then that television, that this is accessible on television now, that is why all of this happens in this movie to begin with.
Yes.
Because now suddenly Blanche is getting attention. She is getting letters. She is having a moment of resurgence in her career. And had she had a different caretaker, things might have ended up a little bit differently for her.
Gee, she must be about 150 by now.
As a matter of fact, dear, I think Blanche Hudson's just a few years older than I am.
Really?
Yes, dear, really.
Well, how come we never see her around? We've been living next door to them for 6 months now. And the only one I ever see is that fat sister slouching around.
You know, that thing you mentioned as well about how the neighbour says, actually, she's only a little bit older than me. The thing that surprises me with both these films, of course, is that these women are actually not even that old, right? There's a moment in Sunset Boulevard where Norma Desmond reveals that she's 50. And you're like, 50? It's like, but again, there's some really interesting commentary there, I think, isn't there, as well, that they're considered, 150 in some way. Yeah.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, because that is just one of the core tenets and also most hilarious things about these movies. Hilarious in a tragic and comic sense.
Yeah.
That these women are only 50. It is absolutely bonkers that when Norma Desmond reveals she's 50, it's treated like an ab fab when Patsy's sister says, Patsy, I'm 72. Like, It is so ridiculous because today, I mean, Paul Rudd is older than that.
Right, exactly.
Thinking about the lifespan and how much the lifespan of, well, I guess the actual physical lifespan of people, but also our glamour lifespan, our how we age today, the beauty treatments, the things that we do to maintain our image or to shift our image, how that has shifted. Like, I'm thinking about the fact that Norma Desmond's 50, that the Hudson sisters are 50. And then I think, like, Jennifer Tilly is 6 years from 70. And she is playing a femme fatale on TV. Like, and like, she's still playing Tiffany, and she's still hot as shit. And she's still wearing the fishnets. And it's just like, how different. Like, thank God we have aged up in terms of our permissions for women, but my God, what a mess.
It's so true. It's so funny. And actually, speaking of, there is definitely an episode in season 2 of Chucky, right, in that mansion house that is very Baby Jane, Sunset Boulevard-esque as well. Which
dying.
Yeah.
Jane, I'm just trying to explain to you how things really are. You wouldn't be able to do these awful things to me if I weren't still in this chair. But you are, Blanche. You are in that chair. And tell me, what are these awful things I'm supposed to be doing to you?
How do you find, this movie does feel a lot more like a horror movie to me. And everything from even the creepy fucking dolls at the beginning, right? It feels like this movie is filled with horror iconography from the very beginning. And like you mentioned at the beginning, it's almost like these women are the witch that lives in that house that never comes out in that neighborhood, right? Like, that's almost how they're painted in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, could you imagine being those neighbors and they're like, well, we never see Blanche, but we see Baby Jane all the time cavorting around outside right? And like she is a full-on ghoul. It's so funny. I mean, just the way that the word grotesque gets applied to this film. I mean, it's entirely just and I mean this. I wonder how to say this without being a misogynist, but or an ageist, but I wonder how much of it is just, I mean, there's the performance, but also I think people just attribute that due to Bette Davis's styling, right? To her face with that makeup on it, with that like garish clown paint and that dark lip. It's just like so just slapped and caked on, which just continues to accumulate throughout the film. Imagine being... That is your neighbor, that you look outside and you just see baby Jane Hudson and her dolls, like just absolute horror. And I think also the choice to make this film black and white, because they didn't have to make this black and white, but it's such a stark, gothic, arresting story that obviously it has to be in black and white. And then when you have the murder sequences, you have the killing of Elvira with a hammer, you have the serving of a bird of Joan Crawford's beloved pet bird that Baby Jane says, "I'm gonna clean the cage," and then she just stomps out with the cage and comes back and tries to feed her sister her own bird after saying it flew out the window. Tries to feed her a rat. Also, John Waters' DNA in there, Desperate Living, in that opening title sequence. Yeah, but like. There's just so it's awash with horror. Of course this gave birth to an entire horror subgenre.
Yeah, oh my god. And yeah, like the black and white is interesting because it's not black and white in the way that Sunset Boulevard looks black and white. Like there's something about Sunset Boulevard that looks so beautiful and cinematic, and there's something about the way this movie is directed by Robert Aldridge, like the cinematography and the sound, the constant like buzzing and the music and the voices. Everything about this movie is like an attack on your senses, right? Like it's quite jarring, you know?
Yes, Sunset Boulevard is very velveteen.
Yeah.
And this is just gravel. This is gravel and nails on a chalkboard. Yeah. I mean, and you get that. You also get that with the two sisters. There's so much duality in this film. And even thinking about just like this is my absolute, you know, read hooked on phonics read, where we have the duality of the black and white, but also duality of Blanche and Baby Jane. And thinking about Baby Jane, Bette Davis's performance, they're both incredible. Both of them are absolutely incredible. But thinking about Bette Davis's performance, where she gets on the telephone and she has to impersonate her sister. And you go from her talking like, "Hey, how are you?" You know, just full Bette Davis, just a troll goblin ghoul queen. And then she switches to her sister and she takes on the velvety dulcet tones of Joan Crawford.
Hello, this is Johnson's. I want to order some liquor. It's Jane Hudson. What do you mean you can't fill any more orders for me? My sister did. Well, wait a minute. I'll put her on. Blanche, would you speak to this man from Johnson's?
Hello. Who is this, please? Oh, yes, Mr. Carson. Yes, this is Blanche Hudson. What seems to be the trouble?
And it's incredible. It's incredible character work. It's incredible voice work. But it also speaks to that duality between how different these two sisters are and how different they are from the rest of the world.
Right. And that's also, there's that meta commentary there as well, right? Because obviously these are two film stars that did have this real life rivalry, right? I mean... I won't go into it for you know, it feels like this has been talked about to death. There's even a TV show Ryan Murphy made called Feud, right, where he had Susan Sarandon and Jessica Lange actually playing Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. But these two actresses reportedly hated each other, right? And there's all these stories about what went on behind the scenes in this film, about that scene when she's kicking, you know, Joan Crawford, she's actually genuinely hurting her and all of this. But the film has become kind of mythic, right, due to what went on behind the scenes just as much as what went on in the story itself.
Oh, yeah, that incredible rivalry. And then, I mean, I still have never seen Feud, despite my my love for Susan Sarandon, despite all my feelings for her as a human being, but my love for watching her on camera, and Jessica Lange. I mean, incredible. You really couldn't get a better cast to play those two women. But so I do need to watch that. But you get there's the rivalry, and then there's the sort of comedy of I think. If you think about Joan Crawford's real life and you think about Mommy Dearest and these awful things are happening to her, meanwhile, what was happening with Christina? But then, if that's even true, who knows? But then you also get Bette Davis's treatment of Joan Crawford. Like Bette Davis gets nominated for this film and then never anywhere in the press never references Joan Crawford, never thanks her, never speaks to her performance. And even Joan Crawford is like, I mean, yeah, she got nominated, but it would have been nice if she mentioned me. I would have done the same for her. And it's kind of hilarious to actually see that dynamic. Like, I don't know how much Joan Crawford was playing up the melodramatic. I mean, she plays this role very well.
Yes.
I really feel for her. I really feel for Blanche. I'm always curious, how much of Joan Crawford really was a baby Jane, though.
Right. I think that's interesting, isn't it? I feel like Joan Crawford behind the scenes, like from what you read and hear, was the much more unhinged one of the two of them, maybe.
Yeah. And yet she, in the story of the rivalry, but Joan kind of plays is sort of playing the Blanche. And is sort of playing a little bit more like she was actually genuinely hurt by Bette Davis's treatment of her. And I find that fascinating because I would just love to know more. I just want to know what is the truth. What really happened between these women? What was Joan Crawford really like in her life? Does any of that matter? No. She is incredible, and she gifted us incredible performances, including in this film.
Yeah, and I think actually one of the things that I liked most about Feud, I think it's probably my favorite Ryan Murphy show that I've seen, and I gave up on American Horror Story after the Freak Show one, I think.
Oh, that's a good time to call it quits, yeah.
Oh, God. But, I do think Feud was good because it felt like he was telling a consistent story, and also it
something written from point A to point B.
Honestly, oh God, it's the only thing he's ever done that's done that, I think. But yeah, the meat of it being that, these women were kind of almost made to have this feud by men in the industry, really. Like, the sad thing about it, at least in the story of that show, that Ryan Murphy show, is that these two actually could have been allies and there for each other.
Yeah.
But it was the system that turned them into these rivals,
Oh, yeah.
It was the men at the top, really, that were the real villains of this whole story and this feud,
Well,
but yeah, it's fascinating.
And how funny that comes to life in this film, that is also paralleled in this film, that there is a Hollywood system that pits these two sisters against each other, where one of them sucks and the other one is just trying to help her along. But because of, I mean, yes, they have their own history, and Blanche, wants to get back at her for being mean at the stage door, or whatever. There is this history, but when it's revealed that at the end, as Mummy Crawford, is trying to have this moment of humanity and reality with her sister, this empathic, connective moment with her, which is so funny that she's constantly trying to appeal to the goodness within her sister, and she's always concerned for her well-being, even when she's killing her.
Yes.
She tells her, oops, my bad. I accidentally misled you into believing that you had caused the tragedy that paralyzed me, but actually I did it, and then I never told anyone, and I just made you think it was the case so you would take care of me for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
and then when Bette Davis just looks at her, like, she breaks. It's sort of a moment much like in The White Lotus season 2 when the man tells the woman, I already forgot all the character names, but when he reveals to her the affair with Aubrey Plaza, and she stops and looks out on the beach and then formulates her plan in a moment of incredible face acting. Bette Davis gets to have a similar moment where she unpsychotic breaks for a second, realizes everything that her sister has just told her, the enormity of all of it, and then says, so you mean all this time we could have been friends?
Oh,
and then immediately goes back and snaps back to little girl, baby Jane. Yeah. And it's that tragedy that, yes, sisters together, we can join hands and rise up and crush the men. Like,
yeah,
and it's always at the 11th hour. It's always too late when that realization comes in. And how sad for these queens.
It's true. It's kind of like Sunset Boulevard. Like, there is this sadness underlying all of this grotesque, mad camp story.
Yeah,
isn't there?
There is a humanity lurking somewhere underneath the subterranea of these stories.
And, and like you said, they're both phenomenal performances. Of course, Bette Davis got the nomination, and that, we're recording this on the day that the Oscars are happening, and it's always the way, right? It's like, is it best acting or is it most acting? Right. And obviously the Bette Davis performance is more likely to be the one that would get a nomination over Joan Crawford.
Right.
But they're both incredible in this movie, and they've both had such interesting careers up until this point as well, right? And yeah, what absolute stars.
Yeah, just top of their game. Is that true? I mean, have they done better work? Yeah, probably. But I mean, this is just, but to get to see them do it together and to get to see them elevate this material in a way that it becomes human somehow at the end of the day, at the end of the tunnel. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just incredible and so funny. Funny.
So funny. And Bette Davis was kind of one of a kind in the way that, Joan Crawford, I think, was that kind of very glamorous Hollywood starlet, but Bette Davis kind of never really fit that box for Hollywood. And that's, it seems like you said, they're almost making a joke of that in the beginning of the movie when you've got these studio execs watching one of Bette Davis' actual performances, and they're sort of saying, no, it's terrible or whatever. And yeah, like she didn't play your typical young woman in those sorts of movies, right? And she didn't fit in that kind of box. And you can see how she evolved to this point in her career. It's so interesting.
Yeah, she just always was a complete singularity, right? Just total weirdo queen, goddess, diva. I mean, of course, she went on to occupy this type of role. I mean, maybe perhaps it's typecasting, but of course, she went on to occupy this type of role for the rest of her career after this. But she did it so well and so comically and was so cool. Yeah. I mean, if you want to see the living embodiment of cool, look up Bette Davis's last interview. And I can't remember who she's talking with. I don't think it was Dick Cavett, but she's just sitting there smoking and just doesn't give a shit. It's just smoking, gossiping, being the coolest person on the planet. And I mean, that's who she was. She was just legit, a real one.
I remember being absolutely terrified and traumatized as a child by the Disney film called The Watcher in the Woods from 1980.
With Kyle Richards.
Yeah, right. Yeah, oh my God, Kyle Richards, yeah. But yeah, she did go on to do all of these kind of creepy roles in these creepy films. What did you call it? Grand Dame Guignol. That's a much nicer way of putting it than, what a lot of people call this subgenre, which is hagsploitation, right?
Hagsploitation.
Yeah.
In reference to the 50-year-old hags depicted therein.
I know.
Stacy Ponder from Gaylord. So Stacy actually taught me the term Grand Dame Guignol. I had or Grand Dame Guignol. I had never really heard that term. I had always thought of these movies as I don't know what I had thought of them before. I've heard the term hagsploitation more recently, and I was kind of shocked to hear that. This has also been called the psycho-biddy genre.
That's right.
Which is also hilarious and offensive. But I think Grand Dame Guignol really speaks to the sheer grotesque drama that's the Guignol, and then of course the Grand Dame, that we get these living legends, that we get actresses of a certain age, 50, playing these roles, and being given a chance to actually just really get to do something larger than life and wonderful, to get a meaty role that isn't just grandma.
Yeah.
Like, of course they're gonna take this. And so, but I think, I'm curious too, is hagsploitation really an appropriate term when we're looking? I mean, just thinking about the age. I mean, at what age does a woman become a hag? Let's find out. Maybe that's Pearl in X.
Exactly.
Maybe we could say she's a hag. But But for me, it's got to be Grand Dame Guignol. But I do think that it is sort of different from what we do see as hagsploitation in Pearl, or not Pearl, but in X, or in the films of James Wan. He is terrified of old women, and he always makes men play them. And those films, or anything that kind of brings up this sort of, I keep trying to think of different films, and I just keep thinking of different James Wan films that have these grotesque
because you're right, because there've been a few of them recently, haven't there? There was X.
We can even argue Barbarian, sort of. She's not old enough to be a hag, but she's depicted in that sort of way.
Yes, that's the one I was trying to think of, which is a great film, but it does, yes, you're right, it's certainly part of that movement of films that are terrified of kind of naked women's bodies, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah, and they must be... even something that I love, I'm thinking of recently having watched Wreck and the Medeiros girl, which is the most terrifying villain I've ever seen in a movie. I love her. I will die for her at her hand, probably by her hammer. But like, what's so interesting too is that we have to distort these women's bodies, and we also don't allow them the autonomy of actually being the women. So we often get men, as this is the case in Wreck, the Medeiros girl, or the case in the James Wan films. Or even in James Wan's, in Insidious, we have the bride in black. And then in Insidious 2, he's like, okay, hagsploitation wasn't enough. We need to do the trans killer trope. And then we have the bride in black is revealed to be a man.
Yes.
Who was forced to, he was kind of Angela'd, like by his Aunt Martha mother. And it's just so strange how that functions, that hagsploitation it's rarely even about women. It's just strictly our fears of them, and then it becomes a form of drag, which is funny because there is a drag element in Grand Dame Guignol, but we actually let the women occupy those roles.
So true. Yeah, I've never really thought about that, about how much James Wan has that. Yeah, because I thought of this with M. Night Shyamalan too, because M. Night Shyamalan obviously had the movie Old, but also The Visit from about 10 years ago as well, which is just literally about this scary old granny, essentially, isn't it? So yeah, it is like he's definitely got that fear as well, you know.
Oh yeah, The Visit. Get in the oven, clean it, whatever she says. But let me tell you, M. Night, I have to say, Mike, you and Stacy are the only two people I can trust in this world. Because both of you have exquisite taste.
The Old is a masterpiece, right?
Both of you are the only people that told me Old is good. And it took me 2 years to listen to you. But when I finally sat down and watched that stupid movie, I was in love. I have never seen anything better. I have never laughed or screamed that loud. But we also get the hag in that when we get that incredible queen from Neon Demon, and I can't remember her name.
Yes,
as
the one that sort of melts and hunches.
My calcium, the calcium queen. That's what I call her because I don't know her actual name, but calcium queen.
So
as
good.
We watch her just like walking on. I mean, that's fully Baby Jane. She took like it's the exact same makeup. She's also on a beach, just like Baby Jane at the end of the film, in her full, like, long scarf-like fabrics. And she's covering herself with her fabric. She's Cassandra of Troy. She's also Gollum. She's in her cave until she, breaks apart as a bone spider. And it's incredible. It's incredible. So there we go. The Baby Jane to Old pipeline right there.
I love it. There you go. But it's so true. This film is unbelievably influential in the horror genre, isn't it? I think, and also the home itself. Like we've talked about this with the kind of gothic mansion, in both these films.
Yeah.
But also just that idea of, I guess this kind of goes back to the old dark house again. It's a kind of subversion of that idea of the sort of the invalid upstairs, in the bedroom that we don't see, that's hidden away, like I think that's such a trope, and this one has kind of flipped it on its head almost.
Yeah. It's also thinking about this, I was curious. I was like, are you covering Misery while talking about these sorts of films?
Yes.
Because this is also, there's a lot of misery in here as well.
100%.
Misery and 9 to 5. You could also do 9 to 5.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, I thought of Misery as well. Those really quite tense moments when she's trying to get away in her wheelchair while, you know, baby Jane is popped out to the shops or whatever, and then is driving back and she finds the note on the driveway. Like, all of that feels so Misery, doesn't it? I think. Not to mention, obviously, the performance itself, the Kathy Bates performance. There is a bit of Bette Davis in that, definitely.
Also, have you watched At Home with Amy Sedaris?
I have not. No.
Mike, you got to get right with God.
Yeah.
So you have to check out At Home with Amy Sedaris, and all listeners should check this out as well, because it's presented as it's her at home cooking show, craft show, entertaining show. She's going to show you how to receive guests and take care of them, just like her books that she's been releasing over the last couple of decades, And so in At Home with Amy Sedaris, almost every episode, her plans just fail apart and the show becomes a different show, where there is an episode that is entirely Notes on a Scandal, where Ann Dowd basically is the Judi Dench character and Notes on a Scandal's her. There's a woman in the cage episode where Amy gets trapped in an elevator and there's these two criminals trying to get her.
Oh my God. I'm going to have to watch
There's
this.
even one where she's paralyzed. She's stuck in a wheelchair. There's a hitman in the house trying to kill her. It turns into like a Wait Until Dark kind of combined with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. But all of those tropes she brings to life and parodies all of these movies that you're talking about. And it's just, I highly recommend it. It's so good. So the DNA is still alive and well.
Yes. That sounds absolutely incredible. Oh, I feel like it's important to the podcast that I do check this out by the sounds of it, because literally all of those movies you've just mentioned are the ones that I'm covering over the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's research.
Yeah,
it's research. I'll try to find the exact episodes and send them to you. But yeah, it's quite good.
I love it. And I've got a quick, before we wrap up, I need to ask you, we haven't really mentioned the weird character of Edwin, played by Victor Buono. You've already, now, him and his mum, I always sort of forget every time I rewatch this movie that there is this whole other sort of B-plot involving Edwin and his mum and, you know, his relationship with Jane. Such a strange element of the movie, isn't it? And such a strange performance from Victor Buono in this.
Yeah, who are these people?
Yeah.
They remind me of like the like dirt hillbilly people in Friday the 13th. Is it part 5?
Yes.
Like that live next door, or even the, like, it's just, they're so weird. Like, who are these people? Why are they American Cockneys? What do they have to do? Like this, and the mom is very much serving that. I can't remember the actress's name, but like the sort of throw mama from the train. That sort
right,
of,
yeah.
She's very much serving that kind of attitude, and then this weird relationship between Baby Jane and Edwin.
It's really weird.
It's drunk, it's sloppy, it's weird. He just wants to get paid, and he's just telling her. I mean, I think he's just telling her that she's good, right? That she's a good singer.
Yeah. And
but he's also into her.
Is she into him, like, sexually, or is it just that she wants a friend? Like, what's going on with these two? It's so strange.
Yeah, it felt very, as I began to latch onto this and think, wait, Blanche, but this is also kind of like Blanche Dubois.
Right.
This is very Streetcar Named Desire. It's the way Bette Davis plays those moments of like, it's very, I don't want realism, I want magic. You know, like Blanche Dubois says.
Yes.
It's very, she wants to live in the flowery world of her imagination. And when she, in her glory days, just like when Blanche was living in the glory days of the Belle Reve plantation. And that relationship that she has with Edwin is very similar to the relationship between Blanche and Mitch. If you look at the sort of romantic undercurrent to it. Yeah. But this is the Guignol version of Streetcar Named Desire, right? This is where you get they are like on stage or whatever. They're not going to depict them as like these drunk, sloppy weirdos, but in this film you do get that.
Yes.
And it is just so weird. It adds another layer of just the grotesque to the film.
Yeah, right. And I guess like daddy issues. They've all got daddy issues, right? Like I think it basically comes down to their fathers with all of these as well. That's just kind of.
I mean, just the sheer horror of "I've written a letter to Daddy."
Oh my god!
The camp quality of those lyrics, like his address is heaven above. The postman said to put kisses instead of stamps.
It's really weird.
I love how they in that opening scene they pretend like, oh, like who is this little boy that's like, I want to hear I've written a letter to Daddy, this little freckled child, and then who is this other little boy that brings her Tyra Banks My Size doll like on stage? But I love how they just pretend like they're just singing this song on a whim, and yet she has a prop envelope that gets lifted up to the wings or up to the rig, the grid up above.
Yeah,
this is so funny. But it also speaks to that sort of gross purity ball kind of. Do you know purity balls? We have purity balls in the United States where like little girls pledge their purity to their father, and then they won't have sex until their dad gives the ring to their future husband. But they do like a dance with their father. It's very much like prom, but with your dad, and it's this weird American evangelist, Southern evangelist thing that happens. But I've written a letter to Daddy is very much that, very much has that built into it. Except it's also about a dead dad, and it's funny.
Oh man!
And to see that echoing in Baby Jane and yeah. Yeah, thinking about Daddy when Daddy was with us.
I mean the dad, Ray Hudson. He's the real villain of this whole story, I think. Right? Like,
absolutely.
He's the reason for all of this. You just think, what's going on there? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, all the way down to like, you want some ice cream? And then Baby Jane says, oh, but Blanche wants ice cream too. And Blanche says, oh, I'm fine. Yeah. Basically, he's like, what are you trying to do? Yeah. It's just so funny.
Unbelievable. So good, isn't it? How do you think it holds up then, this movie? You know, like, again, I think it's just something about it that just feels timeless in a way, right?
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely stellar. It's absolutely stellar. Of course it holds up. It is, I think you're fully right. Timeless is the correct word because, I mean, while this spawned an entire subgenre with it, none of them ever reached this level of both, like, you know, the sort of cultural inheritance or the iconic quality, even just in terms of what people remember. None of them ever came close to whatever happened to Baby Jane. It's so weird and it's so once in a lifetime, never ever going to happen again that of course it's cemented in time, just like Baby Jane's broken psyche.
I know, exactly. And again, there's that, those women's frozen in time. You know, I always think of those images. The imagery really stays with me from this film. You know, the two of them staring out the window together and Bette Davis's face at that moment and everything. But like, again, there's something Miss Havisham about it, isn't there? There's something gothic about it. It's so brilliant.
It's just so good. And once again, I mean, I've referenced it like a jillion times in this episode today, but for anyone that loves this, if you have not seen Grey Gardens, and you need more queens held up in homes and driving themselves insane in close proximity, which is something that I feel like all of us can relate to after the last 3 years, especially if you've lived with other people. You have to see Grey Gardens. It's just incredible, and a portrait of what happens when this happens in real life. But also, you know, co-authored by women that knew that they were on film and knew how to make good TV, essentially.
Right, exactly that. Do you have any favourites from what came after this? You know, that whole subgenre, the Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte and Lady in a Cage and The Nanny and all of those other movies. Like, have you seen many of those ones that
do you know it? I have actually. I am once again. I'm like Melanie Griffith and Born Yesterday. I am a noob, and I have seen so few of these films.
Me too, actually. Yeah,
actually, to a detriment. I long to see Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte and like what Who Slew Auntie Roo?
Yes. But such good titles as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, I think too. There's also there's also some of this quality comes through in a later film that I really love, Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker.
Oh, yes.
You get this with, I would argue you get a lot of these elements with Susan Tyrrell in her performance in Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker as that absolutely deranged housebound auntie, you know?
Yes.
But beyond that, I think of the genre proper and the work that came after this, really the one that I love, that also Stacey loves, that we have yet to talk about on the show, is Straight Jacket with Joan Crawford.
Oh, I've not seen that.
Oh, it's so... I mean, what other Joan Crawford movie opens with an axe murder beheading? Done by Joan Crawford herself, filmed in the most garish black and white. Just the opening scene of her chopping off this guy's head and seeing it happen all in silhouette. It's just incredible. And then from there, it turns into a very thoughtful melodrama that also is a horror film. It's one of Crawford's best, honestly. It's so good. And it was only 2 years after this. I think entirely, you know, because of Baby Jane, that movie happened, and it's just so good.
I love it. And actually, you mentioning things like Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker, it reminds me of those other kind of 80s slashers that have those weird little roles that remind me of Baby Jane. So you've mentioned Aunt Martha, right, in Sleepaway Camp.
I mean,
amazing. And
else?
Of course, like, who else? And of course, like, I know one of your favorites and one of my favorites, but Louise Lasser in Blood Rage as well, right?
I mean, look at the way Louise Lasser is styled in Blood Rage. That's fully Baby Jane Hudson.
Right.
Like, I show Blood Rage every Black Friday. You know, in the States, it's the day after Thanksgiving when all the sales happen and it's horrible. And so I show Blood Rage every Black Friday at the theater, the Hollywood Theater where I work here in Portland. And the last time I showed it, I set it up by saying, you know, she's dressed like JonBenet Ramsey. But I realize now, no, she's actually dressed like Baby Jane Hudson. and it's just incredible. I mean, Louise Lasser sitting on the floor eating the green beans, like straight out of the fridge.
Oh.
It's just, I mean, that's fully... The DNA is right there again.
Yeah, it's just like, that's such a weird film, Blood Rage. I wasn't expecting it to be as weird as it is. Like, it's this conventional slasher movie, but with these weird moments of like Baby Jane weirdness inserted into them, where you're like, what is this movie doing? It's incredible.
With Louise Lasser just delivering a performance from another planet, and it's awe-inspiring. You watch that film and you say anything can happen. All things are possible with God, aka Louise Lasser.
Oh, well, there we go. Well, Anthony, thank you for joining me to discuss these two perfect movies. What a joy.
God, thank you for having me, and God bless these women, these queens.
Absolutely. Well, Anthony, just remind people before we finish where they can find you, more of Anthony, your podcast, and all the other amazing work you do online.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Well, if you light a bag of poo on fire, I will be there. You can find me across social media at the Carla Rossi, like Carlo Rossi, the salty wine, but Carla, at the Carla Rossi. That's also my website, thecarlarossi.com. And you can listen to me and Stacey every week on Gaylords of Darkness, and you can find out more about that at gaylordsofdarkness.com or at Gaylords of Darkness on social media. Or on Twitter, we're Gaylords of D. Because that's funny. So, yeah.
Amazing. Anthony, thank you so much.
Thanks again, Mike. It was a joy. Absolute joy.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to this week's brilliant guest, Anthony Hudson. What an absolute joy it has been to have Anthony on the podcast. And actually, a little shout out to the brilliant Gaylords of Darkness. Actually, in the week that this episode is going out, they're doing an amazing bit of fundraising for the Transgender Law Centre. They're raising money for that very important charity and cause by doing the re-3-ing, and they are reviewing a part 3 of a horror franchise every single day this week. So they've been releasing 7 episodes in a row from Monday to Sunday of this week, of the week that the episode went out. And I would urge everybody to check out their podcast, but also to donate to that very important cause. It's called the Transgender Law Centre, and I will link to that in the show notes. But let us know what you thought of this week's episode and what you think of these incredible films, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane and Sunset Boulevard. Both perfect movies as far as I'm concerned, but what do you think? Please let me know. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on all the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. And if you want to support the making of this podcast and get treated to regular bonus content and more, then you can sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. You can find this podcast in all the regular podcast places, and if you get a spare moment, I'd be so grateful if you could drop us a little rating and review on Apple Podcasts, as that always helps us get discovered by new listeners. So, on to next week, and we stay in the early 1960s for a very different kind of horror. Next week, we are going to be going back to something very gothic and traditional and exploring the world of Edgar Allan Poe. Next week, I'm going to be joined by two guests. First of all, Adam Robinson is going to be dropping in to talk to me a little bit about Edgar Allan Poe, the writer, and about what made his short stories so important in the history of horror. Then, filmmaker Axel Carolyn is going to be joining me to discuss the Roger Corman, Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe adaptations of the early 60s, and we are going to be discussing in depth House of Usher from 1960 and The Pit and the Pendulum from 1961. It's going to be a good one. Join us next week for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.